All right, we'll get started. Susan, I am so happy to have you on the podcast today. I always love chatting with you. You're someone I admire for your passion, commitment, and advocacy of all learners. You're a former ELA, journalism, and ELL teacher, and currently the superintendent of Highline Public Schools. Also, Washington State Superintendent of the Year, and soon to be Superintendent of Washoe County Schools. Welcome.
Thank you, Katie. It's always good to be with you.
So as we get started today, I'd love if you could share a little bit more about your journey, a little bit about your experiences that have led you to be the educator and leader that you are today.
Yeah, so, from a very young age, probably age 7, I wanted to be a teacher. And so I sort of grew up teaching my dolls and stuffed animals, which if you ask that question in a room of educators, many hands will go up. It's kind of a common theme among people who decide to go into teaching. So I always knew that I wanted to be a teacher. But the story, and I've told this before, aside from the fact that I think I was fortunate to have family that was incredibly supportive and supported me in my education and made it possible for me to pursue my education. But I think what really cemented who I would be as an educator, both a teacher and now as a superintendent, was an experience I had as an undergraduate. I was a tutor. I went to Cal, go Bears. And I was meeting a new tutee. His name was Eduardo, and he was from Coalinga, California, which for folks who don't know is a farming community in the Central Valley of California. Large population of migrant farm workers who come there. And his family had come from Mexico. They worked in the fields there. And he was the first in his family, frankly, probably his whole town, to go off to college. And so we were talking about that experience. And he said, I was the only person to graduate from my high school in 3 years. And from my reference point, I heard that as that he graduated from high school in 3 years. And I'm like, wow, man, it took me 4. Like you are something. And I think that this is important because that was my reference point. I came from a world where not graduating from high school was not an option. Everybody graduated from high school. That was just a given, right? And so he got this wry smile on his face and he said, no, you don't understand. I was the only person over the course of 3 years who graduated from my high school because the teachers told us, don't bother, you're going to end up in the fields like your parents. And I was 19 years old, 20 years old at the time, but I knew in my bones, Katie, how wrong that was, and I actually couldn't even wrap my head around the fact that adults, but especially adults who had committed their lives to public education would say that to a child or a young person, would put limitations on them. And so that's when I knew, I already had wanted to be a teacher, but that cemented it. And that didn't just cement that I was going to be a teacher, but it was probably, I didn't know it at the time, the equity seed was planted and that would form the basis for how I would go. And also why I became an ELL teacher. And I worked with students who were newly arrived to the country and didn't quite yet speak English. And I think it was wanting to make sure they had every opportunity available to them. And so I think that was really a seminal experience for me in my learning and development as a person, human being, as an educator, that our job in public education is to make sure that all children have all opportunities available to them.
That just gave me chills when you said, in 3 years, the first person to graduate, and such different experience. Mm-hmm. And it reminded me when I was getting my teaching credential and I read Savage Inequalities and got to see Jonathan Kozol speak. And it was an experience much like that. I grew up middle class, public schools systems where everyone graduated, and that just shook me to read about the experiences of students around the country and what we were providing to some and not others.
And so now I know why we're friends, because colleagues, because Savage Inequalities was also one of those books that shook me. And I saw Jonathan speak, and the last line of that book that says something to the effect of, whether they come from Winnetka or East St. Louis, they all come to us with potential. And his last line in that book is, we soil them needlessly.
Yes.
And people need to sit with that for a minute. We soil them needlessly. And our public education system, done well, should prevent that from happening for every child.
For every child, right? Regardless of where you come from, regardless of circumstance.
Yep.
And my first teaching job was in Hawaii on the leeward side of the island. And so many experiences. I love those students. They taught me way more than I ever taught them. But one of my students, Ashley, said, "Miss, why are you doing this? Like, no one believes in us. We're from Eva Beach." And I just lost it. So, seventh grade teacher in front of the classroom, because I never felt that way as a child, that no one believed in me. Nope. I always felt everyone believed in me. At least my parents, right? At least believed that I had potential. And hearing seventh graders say that and feeling like the community they weren't believed in just really, really shook me. So that's why we're here, right? And we hadn't really planned to dive into that, but thank you for that story and that experience. I can tell it's definitely shaped your journey and the impact that you've had. I was going to chat about this a little bit later, but skipping a few steps, this kind of has remnants of the Highline Promise. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about the Highline Promise and your experience and how that translates to your vision for students?
The promise now heard around the world.
Yes.
I see it in so many places. And I will tell you honestly, at first I was like, hey, wait a second. And then I thought, no, how wonderful though, that something that I believe is such an important sentiment has resonated across the nation with so many people. So, I always believed that my job as a teacher was to know my students by name and need. And so as a high school teacher, I would, there's nothing better than a young idealistic teacher, right? There just isn't. There's no better human being on the planet, because we just believe that like nothing's impossible, right? So, here I have 130, 150 students each year. And I would say the first week of school, I'd do two things. First of all, I would send around a sign-up sheet, and each student signed up for a 15-minute time slot with me before school, after school, lunch, break, whenever we could fit it in. So it took some time. It took, a month or month and a half to do it. But they signed up for a time slot with a one-on-one with me. And just so I could get to know them a little bit. And then I also said to them, I promise that by the end of the first week of school, I will know all of your first names. And I didn't use seating charts, and I encouraged them to sit, because human nature, we always sit in the same seat. I encouraged them to mix it up a little bit. And I did it. Inevitably, each year there were two kids that I would transpose. That was some wiring in my brain, and it became sort of a running joke, like who are going to be the two that Miss Enfield can't keep straight this year. But it mattered, because I felt that I couldn't ask students to enter my classroom and give me respect if I didn't give them the most fundamental form of respect, which was to know their names. And taking it a step further, a name pronounced correctly, with respect and with affection. So that was sort of how I functioned as a teacher. And as I became a leader, a central office leader, I kept that name and need at the core of what I wanted us to do as a system. And when I arrived in Highline in 2012, they were reading a book by Dr. Yvette Jackson called The Pedagogy of Confidence. And the premise of the book is, what if we treated every child as gifted? Yeah. And I was it was actually before I was officially hired, but I was in a meeting with some Highline staff, and I said, what if we made a promise to know every student by name, strength, and need? And that's how the promise was born. And the full promise now is to know every student by name, strength, and need, so they graduate prepared for the future they choose. It has really become the DNA of our system. We use it for recruitment. We use it to hold ourselves accountable. Our families and our community use it to hold us accountable, which is a good thing. Yeah. And I also believe it is probably the best definition of equity that we can come up with. Because as a parent, as a mom, isn't that what you want for your child?
That is exactly what I wrote. There is nothing more that I want for my kids: to be known, to be seen, to be valued for who they are, not for some narrow path and record that school says is a narrow definition of success, and that they navigate their path, right? That is exactly what I want for them to have that confidence. Exactly. Confidence in who they are and where they're going. And not that they have all the answers and that it's mapped out for them specifically, but that they can navigate it
Yep.
on their own as things come up in their life. Absolutely. There's nothing more that I want.
And Katie, I think it's important to note here, we are also at a very interesting point right now as a community with respect to the language we're using around the work we are doing. And I think because of the polarization that exists in our country politically and on many issues related to education, some of the terms that we've been using in education have been co-opted, I will say, or are being used in ways that I don't think we as educators intended them to be used. And so I think it's important that we find better ways to talk about our work in language that truly resonates with the broader public, with parents, with families, and that cannot be reduced to a label. And so I think that promise is put in language that is not, it's not really, it can't be labelized per se. And I think that again, no parent or family member would say that's not what I want for my kid.
You know, so much resonates there. And I think that the more I talk to parents and educators and students and administrators, right, we all want those same things, but it's those labels that get misconstrued and you said get polarized instead of saying, let's just get really descriptive about what we want for our young people. What are the outcomes that we're all moving toward? And then how do we get there, rather than using these words like, oh, it's personalized, it's equity, right? Because they mean different things to different people. And unless we define them in a way, like you said, that people understand and that resonates, we're not actually going to get everyone on the same page to start moving in that direction. We're going to spend too much time arguing about the words rather than actually what matters.
Rather than doing the work. And the other corollary I will offer to that is we really work hard in Highline, and I personally have tried to discipline myself to do this, to use student first language. So not to relegate our students to labels. So you are not a special education student. You are not an ELL student. You are a student with special needs. You are a student who comes speaking a language other than English. You know, so I think that the way, and you've heard me say this, the way we talk to, with, and about our children matters mightily. It just does. And I think we underestimate the degree to which they're paying attention.
Oh, 100%. They hear everything we say, they internalize it, they take it on, they try it out. When I was right after I graduated, before I started my credential, I was a behavioral therapist for young kids with autism. And it was a challenging job. I learned a lot and really got to focus on the person first, learner first language. And that has always stuck with me. And it's just so important. I was reminded when you were talking about the first things you did as a high school teacher, same thing. First day, I would take all my students' names. I would take pictures of them actually, and I would come home and study the pictures.
Oh, I love that.
It was so important to me not to go through the syllabus, not to make sure I went through all the policies, to know them. And then I would have them fill out their strengths in a card. I didn't do the interviews. If I go back, that's a good idea. But I will say, it was so important to me that when I was supervising student teachers, I actually didn't pass someone because it was halfway through the year and they didn't know their students' names. They couldn't connect with them. They just were, it was such a indication to me that they weren't focusing on the students. And I had given many, many chances to learn the names and said it was important, and they didn't do it. And there were many other things, but it's that important.
It's so basic. And I will tell you, obviously, as a superintendent in a district of nearly 18,000 students now, and soon to be over 60,000, I'm not that good. I can't know 18,000 kids' names. Sure. But what I do when I meet with students, which I do regularly, I will ask them, do you have an adult in your school who knows you, whom you trust, whom you can go to if you need help, and who you know is paying attention to what you need? And if I don't get a yes or a hands up, we have a conversation, with the principal to say, we have a child at risk here of being invisible. And we need to figure out how to prevent that from happening.
And that starts from you, right? That's the promise. And so you're making sure that it's happening. But we talked a little bit, it seems it's so foundational that you would just have we say we love kids. That's why we bring them to school, to support them. Yet we know too many are invisible. Too many go through the day without someone saying their name, without someone acknowledging them. So what are some ways in Highline that you guys have mitigated that and really started to make sure that students are known by name, strength, and need?
Yeah, I was just having this conversation with someone else. I think the thing that we don't talk enough about is the importance of the people in our system, how we hire, how we retain, who we hire,
Yeah.
and who we retain. So, Katie, our HR team and our team across the district, I think we've gotten so much smarter and more thoughtful over the years around our recruitment and hiring processes, and being very, very clear on what it means to teach in Highline, who we are, what we stand for. I think one of the mistakes we've made for too long in public education is we treat our school systems as the same. So to teach or to lead in Highline is the same as to teach or lead anywhere else. Not the case. And I think we need to lead with our values as a system if we want to have the people in our system that our children need and deserve. And so, for example, today I'm going to be interviewing principal finalists. So I don't hire teachers, our principals hire that. So the only way that I can ensure that we're delivering on that promise at each school to our families, community, and students is by hiring great principals. And, by the time the finalists come to me, they've been screened and vetted and the whole bit. But the one question that I always ask is, tell me why you are choosing Highline. It's a simple question, but it's an important one. And frankly, if they can't speak to our promise, if they don't talk about what, putting students first and valuing the rich diversity that is our system, then this isn't the place for them. And so I think that getting the right people in the system who are there around a shared set of core values is critical. Then, however, there are things you have to do to operationalize. And, during the pandemic, when we went into distance learning, and in this part of the world, as you know, same for you, we were in distance learning for a long time.
Yes.
So, I knew when it became clear in the fall of 2020 that we likely weren't coming back for a while. Actually, I knew it in the summer, but, it was clear that we were going to have to do something. And I knew that we had to find some ways to keep our students connected to their school community via their devices because we weren't going to be in person. And I asked our building leaders and staff we called it our one-to-one connection program. And I said, I want you to assign an adult I want every child in your school, this is pre-K through 12, to have an adult assigned to them. And that adult checks in with them on a weekly basis. So it's not just the check-in, it's the relationship building. And I actually made a crucial mistake in that I will share, because I also think as leaders, we need to acknowledge our mistakes and our lessons learned and how we're getting better, because we're learners too, right?
Yeah.
So, I remember one teacher emailing me and she was really offended. She said, my team and I at my school do that. We do know all of our students. And I emailed her back and I said, I'm sorry. I, of course, did not mean to imply that you didn't do that. I know that you and so many of our dedicated professionals across Highline do this just as a matter of practice.
Yeah.
But I think that you will agree with me that we can't deny that we don't have invisible, disconnected kids in our schools. And now more than ever, we just can't allow that to continue. And, and that was fair. Now, the mistake that I made in how we operationalize that is I didn't differentiate. Bad practice. So I basically said, okay, you all have to do this in this way. What I should have done, and I think that teacher's criticism reflects the fact that I didn't do that well, was I should have said to principals, look, I need you and your team to go through your student list and make sure, probably, I'm guessing in any given school, probably 60 to 75% of the kids have multiple people who know them, right? And then you've probably got another 20% or so that maybe are kind of connected, but not really. And then you've probably got maybe 5-10% that are really, like, if you put, and this is a powerful exercise, if you put the photos of every child on a table and asked adults to put sticky notes, there would be some kids that didn't have anything. What I should have said is, what are you going to do to ensure that the kids that don't have that connection have it? And so it was the right idea.
Yeah.
It just was a flawed execution. And so we got better about that. And what that translated into this year is we used some of our ESSER dollars to make sure that we had a full day where our educators just connected with families. And it was just, Katie, Katie, what are your kids' names?
Abby and Zach.
Okay, so I'm Abby's teacher. I'm Zach's teacher. Katie, I'm so excited to have Abby in my class this year. Tell me about her. What do you want me to know about her? And what are your hopes for her this year? No, nothing about data, scores, any of that. It was, and we're going to continue that because it's that important.
It is that important. And my kids' teachers did that at the beginning of the year, and it was great. And it was a 15-minute Zoom call. But it meant, and we just had the kids sit with us, we chatted, but those are things that we've learned through the pandemic that I hope we can continue to do. That connection matters when we're not in school.
Yep.
But just because we're physically in person doesn't mean that those connections automatically happen. And sometimes it feels worse because you're in the building and still feel invisible. And so making sure, I love that. Too many people are like, oh, well, they're here and the teacher's got them taken care of. Being really explicit about every child needs to have someone who knows them and is connected with them. And sometimes that means here's your roster of kids to check in with. But I think that advisory or that mentoring for our students doesn't happen as much as it should. And it's a foundational piece to being able to support them throughout their journey.
Agreed.
So I want to transition a little bit from the student networking and being connected to connecting as an adult, because you as a leader are still a learner, as you've mentioned many times, and your own learning experiences, I'm sure, translate to the way that you lead. So first, you are a graduate of, you said Berkeley, go Bears. You earned your master's degree from Stanford and Harvard. And then you have a doctoral degree in administration, planning, and social policy from Harvard's Urban Superintendent's program. It's a lot, Susan. That's awesome. And that's a lot.
I'm tired, Katie. I'm really tired.
I bet you are. So when we think of this space and think about your background, your credentials, these programs that you've been a part of, how have they influenced you and prepared you to lead in the systems you're leading in now?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think I shared early on that story about being a tutor at Berkeley, and I think that was clearly a really important moment in my life and in the educator that I would become and continue to become. I think that in many ways, those experiences led me to mentors that became wonderful, ongoing teachers, friends, colleagues. So when I was at Stanford, I did my student teaching with a wonderful man, may he rest in peace, Nick Ferentinos. And what a gift to have been his student teacher, because, and you and I know, had student teachers.
Yes.
And what Nick did is and Nick believed that I remember he said to me, because technically in the program, like I was supposed to watch him teach for the first 6 weeks and then sort of take over. And he said, nope. He said, if they're not yours from day one, they're not yours. He said, you're going to get up there and I'm going to be here to support you and, talk about throw me into the deep end, but threw me into the deep end with tremendous support. So he would sit there for the first 6 weeks of my student teaching and take copious handwritten notes in pencil. And then he would give up his prep period to go over those notes with me. And I'm going to cry. I still have those handwritten notes. And sadly, when he was ill, I flew down to see him. And I brought those notes with me and I made a copy for him. And I said, I just want you to know, I've kept these. And it's not even so much what you said in them. It's what you did, that you invested so much time in my learning and helped me become, I would argue, I'm the superintendent I am today, because I was and am the teacher that Nick Ferentinos helped me be. And we became lifelong friends. And so I think that he really, I think, set the standard for me of what it means to be a mentor and a teacher. And then, fast forward to my time at Harvard in the Urban Superintendent's program, I was really fortunate to be placed in my superintendent internship in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, with a woman named Vicki Phillips, who is currently at the National Center for Education and the Economy, but was then superintendent and then became the Secretary of Education for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And, you know, Vicki, similar to Nick, invested so much time in me. And so for the first 6 weeks of that 6-month internship, I went everywhere with her, like in the car, wherever she was going, I was there. And she would, you know, there were so many meta moments, right? Where she would, as we were driving from one meeting to another, say, okay, here's why I did what I just did there. And of course, I took copious notes then, right, is what she was doing. But she modeled for me what, to be honest, we didn't use this term then. She modeled for me what being a learner-centered superintendent would be, just as Nick modeled for me what a learner-centered teacher is, not just for students, but for student teachers, right? For other adults.
Yeah.
And so, you know, and obviously Vicki is still someone who I am friends with and learn from, and I'm grateful to know. And there's so many others, but I think that it has been the mentors, the teachers, the friends and colleagues that I've learned from those experiences that have meant the most to me.
Yeah, as you're talking, I was reminded of my mentors, right? The people who have poured into me and invested in me. You're saying taking the notes. I was fortunate also to have an amazing people really are pretty hard on teacher preparation programs, and sometimes for good reason.
Absolutely.
But I had a tremendous teacher preparation program. I had incredible mentors, incredible educators, professors, through my credential, but also my master's and PhD. And same thing, have shaped who I am. And because they have poured into me, have helped me see the power of supporting and mentoring and guiding other people as well.
I mean, I think that I feel we have a responsibility. I feel part of my professional responsibility as an educator is to mentor others and be a resource for others. And that I think that's so important. And then hopefully mentoring, they mentor the next generation. Sure. And so it continues, but it's so important.
So why doesn't it happen? And it doesn't happen enough, right? Not to be negative, but I think that the people who have great mentors and have that opportunity to learn and grow really do develop and flourish in ways. But too many people don't. Why don't we invest more time in mentoring? Why don't we make that more of a commitment as leaders?
So this is going to sound, and I don't want to be negative either, but I think this is sadly true. I know we give so much pretty talk in education around fail forward, and, you know, it's okay to make mistakes, innovate, put yourself out there. But we do not support that in practice. Right. And so I actually don't think we cultivate a way of being that it's okay to truly be a learner. Like the example I just shared earlier of the mistake I made just a year and a half ago with a good idea that I didn't implement well. It's as I think as educators, we have real perfectionism issues. And I don't think we prize being a learner. And if you're not in learner mode, then you don't see the need for being mentored.
Yep.
Right? I mean, you have to be in touch with who you are as a lifelong learner to be open to mentoring. And I also think, Katie, the true is saying once you're a mentor, I'm a big believer in reverse mentoring too. Right? I mean, so I think that we need to get better at saying it's okay to say, I don't know. It's okay to say, I need help. And I know we talk about it. I'm not sure that we support it in practice in the way that we should.
Right. We give coaches to coaches, right? To people who are not performing or underperforming as teachers. If you're a good teacher or a great teacher, you rarely get the mentoring, coaching support that's designed into your day. Principals, incredibly difficult, challenging job sometimes, and a lot for a new principal to take on. Don't always have those mentors or those opportunities to learn. And I think maybe creating that in our professional learning. I mean, we know the research says over and over again that coaching, mentoring, support is what shifts practice, is what helps people grow.
100%. But, you know, the other thing too that I will say as well is I think, you know, I think as human beings, we have whether we recognize it or not, whether we like it or not, I think we have a fundamental need to learn. We have a fundamental need to grow, to move forward, to not stagnate. And so, this is so front and center for me right now because, my decision to leave Highline was a big part of it was because I felt that Highline deserved a fresh leader with fresh eyes to take them to the next level. I think every leader needs to have the self-awareness and humility to know when they've done what they can do and it's time to move on. But I also felt like that I, as a leader and learner, was stagnating a little bit, right? I was starting to feel stale. And I felt I need to be pushed. I need to get uncomfortable again in not being the expert, in being the new kid in town, in being a learner. Now, is that scary? Yes. If you call me in 6 months, will I maybe regret this decision? Absolutely. Like when it gets really hard. But I'm excited about this notion of going to a new state, to going to a new system, knowing that I have so much to learn, but I'm excited by the prospect. And I think that's true for a lot of us. But it's scary, right? You have to be willing to take that next step. You have to be willing to say goodbye to the familiar and the comfortable. I could have stayed in Highline for another few years and coasted. But that's not good for me. And it certainly wasn't right for Highline. Every system deserves a leader who is constantly learning and pushing.
What is the simple say? Be brave enough to suck at something new.
Yeah. Right? Yeah. Don't be afraid to take that big step into the unknown. So, I think that we need to do a better job of not just doing it, modeling it, but talking about it, right? That talking about my decision to leave Highline and go to Washoe County isn't just about going to a bigger job. That's not what it's about. It's about a new learning opportunity and a chance to do good, meaningful work in a different context.
Yeah. And to grow as person and as a leader. And like you said, that we all have this desire to learn. And when I talk to people about their most significant learning experiences, they talk about it being personal and authentic and meaningful. But the part we just talked about, mentoring, that always comes up. No one does it on their own. No one has a big, significant learning experience without working with somebody else, without a mentor that is guiding, giving feedback and pushing. And sometimes, a lot of times, frankly, in our classrooms, that is missing. That one-to-one connection, that guidance, that feedback, that mentoring of knowing a student and pushing them to their next level, that technology can't do, that the best programs in the world can't do. Sometimes it's just that human connection that's needed to help someone move to that next level.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's really, really true. And I also think it's important to, I've been so fortunate to have so many great mentors, opportunities to work with such an extraordinary team in Highline. And the work that we've done has gotten some recognition for the district and also for me. And there's, some might look at this and say like, in fact, when I decided to leave Highline, I was like, well, why don't you go consult? Why don't you do this, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, I'm not at that phase yet. I want to be in the work. And I want to not rest on my laurels, right? Like, it's tempting, I think, as a human being to say, maybe I'm at the top of my game, maybe like this is as good as it gets. And I maybe just do kind of coast for a little bit. But that, I don't think as an educator, as educators, we can afford to do that. I think we need to do better.
Yeah. And you are going to learn and grow, and systems will learn and grow, and we will all learn and grow because of it. And part of what we're talking too is you're a networked educator, right? You're a networked leader. And I was telling you this a little bit earlier, that some people say, oh, it's sleazy. I'm an educator. I don't want to be networked, right? But so Julia Fisher-Friedland, I love her book. She wrote, it's not just about what you know, it's about who knows what you know. Right. Mm-hmm. So I want to think about this, like when people say they don't want to be networked or they just want to focus on kids, so often we miss out on those opportunities for our own learning and growth, but also for our students if we only focus on what's in front of us without connecting to other people. So I'd love your advice and kind of what would you say to educators? Why is it important to be networked and connect with other people?
Well, because we're not going to maximize our own learning if we only stay in the middle of that which we know. So whether it's our own classroom, our own school, our own city, our own town, or community, we've got to get out and see what else is out there. And I think too, especially when it comes to being sort of in a cycle of continuous self-improvement and growth, and also in a way of improving practice and seeing that something maybe I thought wasn't possible is, you don't change somebody's belief system by telling them to do so. So if I say to you, Katie, you need to believe that every child who walks in is capable of doing great work. And you might say, yeah, but you don't know my kids. Da, da. But if I can send you somewhere where you can see that happening, all of a sudden your belief system shifts because you see that it's possible. And then of course, your colleagues, your system, your principal, your superintendent have the responsibility to provide you with the supports and the conditions to apply that learning, right? So that it happens for kids. I just don't think we get better by staying in the familiar. We get better by going and seeing that which is different and new and exciting. And I also think that there is great, I find whenever I go to do a visit to another district or to a meeting or a conference, I feel two things very, very strongly. One, I feel really proud of the work my colleagues and students and families and community in Highline are doing. And I feel like I am standing still and not doing anything at all, right? Because I see things that validate what we're doing in Highline, and I see, more importantly, things that we're not doing and could be. And I'm like, gosh, we could do that. Why aren't we doing that? And I think that's really important because you bring those ideas back, and your students, your families, your staff benefit from it. So I think being a part of networking, and it also also fills our human need to not be alone.
Yeah.
Isolating ourselves in this work, closing our classroom door, closing our office door. That's just, not only does it not help us learn, I just don't think it's healthy.
Yeah.
We need interaction as human beings. We crave interaction. And so I think that outreach and relationship building, which is central to networking, is central to fulfilling our needs as human beings, not just as learners.
Yeah. And just, that being connected people, learning about other people, learning about the experiences, right? Like we said early on in our career, I wasn't networked. I didn't know what was beyond my own community. My world has opened up tremendously, and it's helped me understand my own experience in the context of the world, not in this isolated event, but how I have privilege and experiences and affordances differently than other people. And also, I love how you said that you feel at the same time validated and proud of the work you're doing, and also like, oh my gosh, the urgency to try new things.
Absolutely.
And that has, to me, been the biggest learning of my own career, is getting to see other classrooms, other systems. And I find so often we come and tell people, instead of mentoring, guiding, coaching, networking, here's what you're doing wrong, fix it. Or here's the belief you now need to hold, which of course does not change anything, like you said.
Right.
But as soon as you bring someone and just say, check it out, let me know what you think. Right. The light bulbs go off and people are like, oh my gosh, I want to do this. Oh, that's a great idea. Can I try this? Instead of you coming and saying you have to fix it, exposing people to new ideas often helps them think of those ideas, and even more than you could possibly tell them to do on your own.
Yeah, exactly. I think somehow there's an implied indictment that people feel when we say, hey, go check this out. It's not that what you're doing isn't great. It's not that, I don't appreciate what you're doing, but shouldn't we always be trying to improve and do better? But I think it's that implied indictment that shouldn't be there. But I think that's what people feel.
Right. Instead of you're not doing this well enough, it's like, hey, let's just go celebrate what's working. That's been my favorite new language or approach, is, and really, let's go see what's working. Let's just go celebrate all the great things that are happening. And of course, people do. They start realizing they're doing more than they thought. They realize there's much happening outside of their own classroom or school. But at the same time, people go, oh, I could try that. That's not that hard. But until you experience something new, like you said, it's really hard for us to think about what's possible in our own circumstance.
Well, and Katie, I'm also just, I don't know why this story just came into my mind, but I talked about how we don't, in very tangible ways, support improvement and learning amongst our educators. And this is maybe just a few months ago. I was in a school, back in January, February, when it was rough. My cabinet and I each took on a school or two that we would go and be there for about 4 hours a day to provide the principal with a little relief. And so I was at a school where I was walking through classrooms, and I walked into a particular classroom. It was an elementary school, and I could tell a teacher was having a bad day. Like, we've all been there.
Yes.
As a teacher, we've all been there. And and I walked in, and then I just walked out and didn't think anything of it. Right. I mean, and I never walk in with a clipboard or a note, and the reality is I don't need a rubric. I don't need a clipboard. When I walk into a classroom, I know I'm seeing one of three things typically.
Yep.
Number one, a great teacher who's like firing on all cylinders, and the kids and he or she are just they're in the zone. Right. Or I'm seeing a great teacher who's having a bad day. Right. And again, been there, but you can tell by looking around the room, by watching the students, by watching the teacher, that what you're seeing is a temporary moment in time. Right. And third, you see someone who's really struggling. And you have an obligation, I think, to figure out what's at the nature of that struggle. So, there's a difference between someone who's really struggling ongoing versus someone who's having a bad day, and asking the principal, are they new to the school? Are they new to the subject matter? What is it that we can do to help them? And I guess the fourth thing is, on very rare occasions, Katie, you do see someone who probably needs to choose a different career path. Yeah. Let's just be honest about it, right? Yeah. Now, those are outliers. I want to be clear.
It's rare, right?
But you see that.
Yeah.
So I knew that on this day, I was walking in on a teacher who's having a bad day on the heels of a bad year and a half, right? Like, let's be honest. And the principal came up to me later and said, so-and-so came to me and felt awful. She said to her students, I got caught being a bad teacher by the big boss. Oh. And my heart just broke, right? My heart just broke because, and she didn't say that out of like fear that anything bad was going to happen to her. She said it out of, what I heard in that statement was, I've let you down. I've let my superintendent down. Like, she just felt. And so, I went back into the classroom after her kids had left, and I just said, how are you? And she'd been struggling. She had just come back from some leave and And I said, I get it. I said, I've been exactly in that moment. That one moment doesn't define you as a teacher. And I don't want you in any way to carry that burden. And then we had a conversation about what she did need, about how she was doing. And so I think it's also making sure that we are mindful of our presence as leaders in a school building and mitigating the unintended negative impact that our presence can have. And I don't think we talk about that enough either.
Well, I think that story exemplifies the Highline Promise, and not just for your students, but for everyone as learners. And if you don't treat your principals and your teachers with that kind of respect, to know them, see them, and help them figure out their path, how in the world do you expect them to do it for their students?
Right. Exactly.
So thank you for that story.
Well, of course.
I have one question before we get to rapid fire.
Okay.
So you've argued that we need a bolder and more creative look at our current systems. Hands down agree, right? And I had the opportunity to hear you speak recently, and you shared your vision with our local community. You said, I don't believe the window has closed to create better opportunities and to think about grading more broadly. It requires great teaching, knowing students, and high quality instructional materials. I wrote this down when you were speaking, and it just, it really stuck with me. But I think obviously I couldn't agree more. We do have an opportunity to shift practices. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious, as we kind of close out this conversation, what are the things you're seeing in Highline or that are coming out of the pandemic and or other places that really are bright spots we should be focusing our attention and energy on?
Sure. Well, I'll start with some of the more obvious. I think the integration of technology on so many levels, right?
Yeah.
So like I was at a school last week and I was watching these, I think they were second or third grade students like gathered around a little mini green screen and some Legos, and they had a program on their iPad where they were creating an animated video, using this, and they were into it, right? And they could tell me what they were doing, and they were so adept at at using the technology to apply their learning. And I think that because more students have had access to the technology, they're better at using it, right? Because kids pick it up like that. And so I don't think it's an add-on anymore. I think it's been more integrated and more seamless as part of our students' learning experience, which is a positive. Similarly, I think the same is true for our teachers. I think they are much more, I mean, I've had teachers say to me, I never would have done this a couple of years ago. I wouldn't be using my smart board, my Promethean board, the way that I'm doing it, right? Like, so I think that's a positive. And on the family front, families can now engage and attend meetings virtually that allows for far more participation that is more respectful of their reality, right? They don't have to get childcare. They don't have to leave work. They can do it, just like this. So I think that has shifted how we look at engagement.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's shifted how we look at technology in the classroom. And again, not an add-on. So I think that's a positive. I think too, one of the things, and this work really predated the pandemic, but we've accelerated it during the pandemic. I have been in the midst of what we call a data redesign process. So we have had some funding from the Gates Foundation to rethink how we look at data, not just for students, but for teachers and staff, and creating student and teacher profiles. So it goes beyond numbers. It goes beyond what prep program you went through as a teacher. It goes beyond what your SBAC score was as a fifth grader. There's more contextualized data in there around who you are as a learner, right? It's putting the learner at the center of the data. And I'm very excited about the potential for that work. Really operationalizing our promise in a way that we haven't to date. So I think there's huge potential there in how we look at multiple forms of data and valuing them equally. So I think that's exciting work that I see. And I think too, to be clear, there are challenges. There are students and staff who are still struggling to sort of regroup and move forward based on everything that's happened. And there are also classrooms that I will walk into later today, and it will be like, what pandemic?
Yeah.
And so I think we need to have a very realistic and honest assessment of the fact that we are in a multi-year recovery effort. And we can acknowledge that and still celebrate the fact that there's some awesome stuff happening in our schools right now. Both things can be true. So let's not sort of just grab onto the doom and gloom, and let's not also be Susie Sunshine. Like, let's find that realistic assessment of where we are.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because I've, been in a ton of classrooms in the last 6 months, and I've seen amazing things happen, right? I hear the national rhetoric and narrative of everything's horrible, everyone's miserable, and yet I see so many classrooms full of joy and learning. And so, not to negate that there are challenges, like you said, but let's use that differentiated approach or learner-centered approach that you talked about with, it's not just everyone connect with a student. Let's figure out where the bright spots are. Let's figure out what's working, what's not, and ultimately what's possible. Because there are a lot of things that we're learning coming out of the pandemic.
So much.
That we can really shift. And frankly, there's quite a few things that we can leave behind.
Amen. Like the perfect attendance certificates.
Thank you. Yeah.
Bye-bye. Let's recycle those.
Yes. Let's start valuing kids for the things that we actually care about. Let's start honoring those who showed up and were courageous, those who were, working through productive struggle and being great learners. Let's value those things, not, hey, you sat in a seat every day this year.
And also, let's value the teacher who says, I need to take a day today because I need to show up with my A game for my kids.
Yeah.
I respect and value that. You take that day. You
Yeah.
do what you need to do, because I do need you to bring your A game for our kids.
Yeah.
And you need to invest in yourself. So one of the things I model, Katie, is health and family first. Health and family first,
Yeah.
always, because our kids need us to bring our A game, and we can't do that if we're not well ourselves.
Right. And if teachers can't be human and can't go to a doctor's appointment or take care of their own families because they're teaching, then we are going to lose our best teachers because we're not allowing for that flexibility and those opportunities to take care of what they need to.
100%.
All right. I have a few rapid fire questions.
Fire. Okay, I'm ready.
What is one thing we should stop doing in education?
Well, I just said the attendance certificates. This is going to be a longer answer. I wish we would stop clinging to the familiar with such a white knuckle grip. I wish we were having more conversations around different calendars, around high school looking different. I mean, and not just talk about them like in little pockets. I wish there were a national conversation. So what we should stop doing is continuing to do that which we know without critically examining it and being open to an overhaul and doing something different.
Amen. What is one thing we should start doing?
Same. Right. I mean, I think we really do need to have an honest conversation. And what I would love to see is I would love to see NSBA and AASA and NEA and AFT to like all come to the table, right? And say, let's talk about a national agenda, a child-centered national agenda. And what would that mean for our public education system? What would need to change? And how will we as the adults support one another in making that change on behalf of our kids?
Sign me up. All right. What should we keep doing?
Loving our kids.
Yeah.
We should keep showing up every day, making sure that our children feel seen, safe, and supported today more than ever, sadly.
For sure. What's one thing that you're focusing on or learning specifically right now?
Ooh, that's a great question. So much. I think I'm spending a lot of time thinking about, as I enter a new system and have an opportunity to do things better than I did where I am now, but still knowing that Highline Promise is the right work, that it is the work. Yeah. So I'm really figuring out now, how do I operationalize that at scale in meaningful ways? And I'm talking to a lot of people about what that would look like. But I want to double down on that promise, Katie. I want to double down on making that promise a reality. Because I think that has the power to transform our public education system. If we could say, and it wouldn't look the same everywhere. So I'm not saying there's like one cookie cutter. It would look different depending on where you were. But if we could say we were delivering on that, we wouldn't be having conversations around what needs to stop, start, be different.
Yeah, that is, to me, that promise, you said, equity, learner-centered at its core. Mm-hmm. What is one thing that people may not know about you that you're willing to share?
Yeah, exactly. Right. I got asked this actually by the leadership team in Washoe County. I presented to them last week at their meeting. Oh gosh. So here's one thing. So I am not a very, I don't have a lot of athletic prowess. I didn't play sports in school. I used to run, but let's face it, running is for people who don't have like coordination. I mean, like if they wrote on my 5th grade report card, chatty and afraid of the ball. And like, if a ball comes at me, I'm going to duck every time. Like I have no hand-eye coordination. But back when I was living in Pennsylvania, I did become a certified spinning instructor. And I taught I know they call it cycling now. Back in the day, it was spinning. Boy, now I'm really dating myself, right? And I loved it. I really, really loved doing that. Again, it was a form of teaching, right? Once a teacher, always a teacher. But I was doing something that, again, pushed me out of my comfort zone a little bit. But I really enjoyed it. So I'm not sure people would look at me now and say, hey, I bet she's a cycling instructor. So that's something that not everybody knows.
I love it. I did not expect that. I just went to my first spin class last week with Mike Nagler, actually.
Oh, really? Nice.
Nice. All right. A few more. Favorite quote or saying?
Oh, yeah. Well, one of them, there's so many. but one of them is, it's in a paperweight that my father gave me when I graduated with my master's and my teaching credential. And it's by William Butler Yeats. And it's "Education is not the filling of a pail, but the lighting of a fire."
Love that. All right. What are you grateful for right now?
Oh, that the people I love are healthy and safe.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the day, nothing else matters.
Yeah, same. Finally, last thing, what is your hope for the future of education?
That 10 years from now, we're not having the same conversation. We have to stop living Groundhog Day. And we really need for things to change. And so I hope that the next generation of superintendents and teachers and principals and leaders is doing work that looks fundamentally different from what we are doing today, and yet has at its core the same values of keeping the learner at the center and of knowing every child by name, strength, and need, so they graduate prepared for whatever future they choose for themselves.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you for having that passion and that vision, and for having the courage and being vulnerable enough to learn and live out loud as you lead systems in Highline and as you move to the next one. I'm just grateful for you. So thank you.
Grateful for you, Katie. Glad to be part of your network.